Well, hi everyone, Pastor Al here. I love it when people listen close enough to a sermon to have questions afterwards, and I love having questions. It shows me that maybe sometimes I didn't make something very clear. A lot of times that happens because I'm trying to get a lot of information to a fairly short period of time. I had a couple of people ask me from this last sermon, when we talked about Paul being arrested on the Temple Mount, what happened to Trophimus, the Ephesian, who was there in Jerusalem with me. So let me tell you just a little bit about his story, because it's kind of cool. You can follow it through Acts and through other parts of the Bible. Trophimus is obviously one of the people that Paul comes into a relationship with at Ephesus. We can maybe guess that he's one of Paul's converts. Paul's there between 2 and 3 years, so he makes very good friends there. At the end of his last missionary journey, he decides he wants to go back to Jerusalem. He wants to get there by Pentecost. He's actually over in Greece, we think in Corinth. And it's, of course, a long journey, and he's mostly going to do this by boat. And the way the boats kind of traveled the Aegean is they didn't cut straight across the ocean, which was kind of dangerous, or the sea there. They kind of went from port to port to port and picked up some passengers, let passengers off, did a little commerce on the way. It was kind of port hopping. So Paul starts port hopping on his way back over. He gets to Troas, which is north of Ephesus, very close to the border of where you'd have a very narrow channel between what's now Greece and Turkey. He meets a number of elders there, church leaders, and Trophimus is one of them. From there he goes not to Ephesus, but he goes to Miletus. Now Miletus is the next big port city to the south of Ephesus. It's about 9 or 10 miles as the crow flies. He goes there because I think he knows if he goes to Ephesus, it's such an important place. He has so many people he knows there. He's not going to be able to get in and out of there quickly. So he gets to Miletus. He sends word up to Ephesus to ask the church elders to come and meet him. They all come down. They have this wonderful, one of the most moving passages, actually, in the entire New Testament, when Paul talks about what God's done for them, and he challenges them, and he warns them. And then at the very end, I have to put my glasses on to read this. It's the very end of Acts chapter 20. We read starting at verse 36. And when he said all these things, he knelt down and prayed with them all. And there was much weeping on the part of them all. They embraced Paul and kissed him, being sorrowful most of all because of the word he had spoken, that they would not see his face again. Then they accompanied him to the ship. In fact, interesting enough, if you went with Turkey to us a few years ago, we went to Miletus and saw where that harbor was, the ship that Paul would have got on. Paul knew that something was going to happen in Jerusalem. He'd been warned and didn't know exactly what, but he had a feeling that all of a sudden his life would change. He goes to Jerusalem, and we believe that Trophimus goes with him. Why else would this Gentile Greek Christian have to go to Jerusalem? You know, after the Roman Empire becomes Christian, it becomes a great site for pilgrimage. But not then. A non-Jew had no particular reason to go there. But there's a lot of Jerusalem other than the Temple Mount. And he accompanied Paul to that area, and people obviously saw him walking around the streets of Jerusalem with this obvious non-Jew. And Jews dressed different, and so it would have been very apparent. If you went up to the Temple Mount was built like most temples, and they had little concentric squares that got closer and closer together and more holy. So the largest area, right on the very rim, is the court of the Gentiles. It's where a non-Jew can go, whether you're a believer in God, they call them God-fearer or not. Then there was that low wall we talked about that you couldn't pass. And on the other side of that wall was the court of the women. And women and children could go in there, along with men, of course. The next court inside was the court of the men. And that's where the sacrificial altar was. And then, of course, inside was the temple. And everyone had to sort of stay in their own area. Paul goes up into probably the court of the men. People see him there because they have seen Trophimus with him. They assume Trophimus is with him now. Probably a lot of people up there, and, it was hard to tell the difference. So that's when they riot. Trophimus is not on the Temple Mount apparently at the time. And eventually he makes his way back to Ephesus. Now, we know that he hangs out and continues to have a life in the Christian community. We get down to 2 Timothy at the very end. And Paul indicates that Trophimus had once again been traveling with Paul. Now, what happens with Paul after his imprisonment in Rome is a little of a mystery. He either is arrested, stays in Rome, gets executed on his first imprisonment. Time-wise, that's hard to figure out. Or he gets released from his first imprisonment, travels around some more, comes back to Rome, and he's there arrested again. And after that second arrest is when Paul's executed. We don't really know. In fact, I've often thought the first thing I'm going to do when I get to heaven is not go and talk to Jesus or go and talk to Paul. I want to go talk to Luke. I want to ask him why he didn't fill out the story a little better and tell us what happened. So Trophimus winds up in 2 Timothy, sick and actually back at Miletus. So that's the long answer to what's a short question. No, Trophimus wasn't on the Temple Mount. It was a mistake. And later on, after Paul is rescued by the Roman soldiers, held in detention, when the Jews come and bring charges against him, they don't charge him with bringing a non-Jew to the temple. They basically charge him with trying to teach people things which are illegal for Jews, violating the Jewish religion. They realized that the first riot against him was actually a big mistake. But they know Paul, they don't like him, and they want to stop him. So that's your little sermon update for the day. I hope that you history nerds found it interesting. And we'll have some more for you on Sunday morning. God bless you. Bye.